Okay, thank you, Anthony. Thank you for that really gracious introduction. Appreciate it, and I really appreciate being here with this group. This is something that I'm really moved to be involved with. So, in the first two sessions, we are going to talk about career guidance for students, and also looking at adults, but looking at adults from the perspective of them looking back on their schooling. Looking at the experience of people who have disabling conditions, as well as learning disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this project clearly fits into the theme of this session on inequities, because people with disabling conditions clearly do suffer from inequities. In our view, this is a major social justice issue. So I'm going to begin by just spending a few minutes going over the conceptual framework, and then I will introduce the presenters, and then they will take it from there. So let me share my screen. The framework we're going to be using is psychology of working theory, which is an area I've been involved with for actually about 20 years. And it's been an amazing journey to be involved in this particular perspective. And I have so many wonderful colleagues who joined me in this effort. It's a strong social justice effort, as you will see. Okay, so the framework for psychology of working theory is that we developed a new paradigm with which to think about people's work lives. Here on the screen, you have the cover of my first book that came out in 2006. And this was the book where I really laid out the vision for this field. And out of this perspective, which is what this book presented, are two theories. One is the relational theory of working, and the second is a more specified psychology of working theory. Whoops. Okay, hold on. So I'll have just two screens with some of the assumptions of psychology of working theory. One is that work is a central aspect of life and of our mental health. One of the main goals is our desire to study everybody who works and who wants to work. This work grew out of a critique that I have been brewing around career development and career guidance, that it was focusing particularly in North America on people who had some degree of access to decent work. Another assumption is that work and non-work experiences are seamlessly connected. We also believe working occurs both in the marketplace as well as in our caregiving lives. And ultimately, we view psychology of working as a theory of change, where the goal is to develop ideas, practices that'll help individuals change, but as importantly, and maybe even more importantly, that will help communities and institutions change. Okay, another core aspect is that optimally work can fulfill three sets of needs. The first is need for survival and power. The second is the need for relatedness and social contribution. And the third is the need for self-determination. You'll see these themes coming up in the subsequent presentation by Carly Gilson and James Sinclair. So in terms of an intervention framework, we've developed one back in 2019 that has three components. The first is that we try to, as career guidance professionals, to facilitate proactive engagement. We also work very strongly in the critical consciousness space. And then thirdly, we work to facilitate access to social support and community engagement. So let me introduce my presenters. The first presentation is called Career Guidance and Employment for Students and Adults with Disabilities, Challenges and Opportunities. This project actually does include me as the last author, but the lead author is Carly Blustein Gilson. You may be wondering about the shared name. It's not a coincidence. Carly is my niece, and this is a tremendous honor for me to introduce her at a conference of this nature. James Sinclair is her colleague, who actually was a student in one of my classes about 10 years ago. So they will present for about 20 minutes, and then they'll have 10 minutes for Q&A. The next presentation will be by two other people I feel very close to. These are two close Israeli colleagues, Galia Ron and Rachel Gali Cinnamon. Both of them are from Tel Aviv University, and they will be speaking about work experiences of adolescents with severe learning disabilities and ADHD. And so basically what we'll do is we'll have a Q&A after each presentation. Each presenter will go no more than 20 minutes. They'll give us about 8 minutes, 10 minutes for questions. And we will finish up our part of this, as Anthony suggested, in about 57 minutes. Okay, so Carly, you can begin. I will stop the share.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Carly Gilson. I am an associate professor at Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, in the United States. And I'm joined by James Sinclair. I'll let him introduce himself while I pull up our slides.
Hi there, I'm James. I'm a researcher at the University of Oregon, which is in the northwest portion of the United States, closer to Canada and Alaska within the US.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right, so we will share a qualitative study that we conducted about the working lives and experiences of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we'll talk more about that term in a minute. But what is interesting is, as David said, that this is based on the conceptual framework of psychology of working. And several years ago, when David was writing a book that was mentioned earlier, Work in the Age of Uncertainty, that is an excellent book and is a compilation of interviews with different people all over the United States about their working experiences and working conditions, and how the psychology of working has influenced or conceptualized their views of work. And while he was writing this book, I was a PhD student, and I remember him telling me about it, and I asked him if he included anyone with a disability, specifically an intellectual disability, because my field of work is special education. And at the time he said, no, but I think you should do that. You should do a similar, you should write a book, I think is what he said. And at the time I was working on my dissertation, so I was not going to start a book, but it blossomed the idea for the study that you're about to hear about, which is sort of an extension of David's work, but applied to a specific subset of the population for whom we feel work is really understudied and less optimally an opportunity. So I'm going to turn it over to James now to talk a little bit about the context in the United States.
So both Carly and I work within the field of special education within the United States, and special education is provided to all students in public schools within the US, and within that they have different categories of disabilities, and within our federal laws kind of define what those are. And so we recognize that the definitions that we use within the United States is not necessarily the same definitions that are translated across in different countries. And so we just wanted to provide a brief context as to, you know, who are we talking about when we say intellectual and developmental disabilities? And so we define it as intellectual disability as a disability characterized by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and in adaptive behavior, which covers many everyday social and practical skills. And so students with IDD, as we might call it, often receive special education services in the United States under different categories called intellectual disability, potentially autism, multiple disabilities. Depending on their age, it could be developmental delay. So there's a few different categories in which students with intellectual disabilities may receive specialized educational services within the US. And then that also changes a little bit as they go into the adult system. So when we talk about our population within the study, we're mainly focusing in on that young adulthood to adulthood population. And even that eligibility criteria for services changes depending on what state and where in the country they are to get services. But we're really kind of utilizing this particular definition to kind of give us some groundwork, and so you understand who we're talking about in our sample. and just a little bit of a background. So this is a graph that just kind of shows kind of what I think a lot of people may or may not know about employment within the United States, and kind of the big discrepancies between employment for individuals with disabilities compared to individuals who don't experience a disability. And within that, we also start to see even more discrepancy within the population of people who experience a cognitive disability or an intellectual disability. And so this is a very important piece for both Carly and I and the people doing this research around how do we bridge this gap? Why is there a gap so large in employment? And what can we do in terms of creating an atmosphere within the US to find ways to get employment for these individuals? And one of those reasons that we want to do this is just because historically we've seen just a very low underemployment and kind of chronic unemployment of that group. Within this, so within the larger context of the United States, there is a movement to try to address the underemployment and unemployment of individuals with intellectual disabilities. And that movement is called Employment First. And Employment First really is a framework that's centering itself on the idea that all individuals can work and they should have full participation in integrated employment. And that's really defined within this framework as work paid directly by employers at a greater or minimum of prevailing wages with commensurate benefits occurring in a typical work setting. Not sure what happened, but I can still read. Prevailing commensurate benefits occurring in a typical work setting where the employee with a disability interacts or has the opportunity to interact continuously with coworkers without disabilities, has an opportunity for advancement and job mobility, and is preferably engaged full time. Give me just a second, I'll share my screen here. So within Employment First, we really are seeing this is not a federal mandate. This is not a federal law that is requiring employers to employ individuals with disabilities, but it's really focusing on the idea of how do we start bridging the gap and training employers to see the value in employing individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and being able to get them integrated into society. So that's really this movement. Different states within the United States have different legislation, different policies, but what we're hoping is that this movement continues so that people really see on a federal level or on a national level the value of what individuals with intellectual disabilities can contribute to the workplace. And then, is Carly on yet?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay,
sorry
great.
about that.
Okay, do you want me to keep progressing then, Carly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your internet seems more stable than mine. Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of our study then was to understand the extent to which the conceptual framework that David spoke about earlier, the psychology of working framework, applied specifically to this subset of the population of adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So specifically, we were interested in understanding how individuals who had work experience, employment experience, made meaning about the ways in which work fulfills their needs and aspirations. So just broadly, even before applying that taxonomy, we wanted to know how do they find fulfillment in work in their lives. And then secondly, specifically, how does the psychology of working framework, the taxonomy that David spoke about, fit in with the lived experiences of working age adults with IDD? So we conducted a qualitative study of 18 participants from 7 different regions across the United States. So we had representation from the western part of the United States, the Pacific Coast area, the Southwest, the Southeast, Midwest, Northeast, and then the Rocky Mountain region toward the west as well. And our population sample was mostly male, mostly white, non-Hispanic, with an age range of about 19 to 39. And interestingly, a note there that both James and I are very interested specifically in the subset field of transition within special education. So most of our work tends to focus on high school students or students who are in college or young adults. And with this, we had very broad recruitments. And so we reached out to all different types of organizations that supported people with intellectual disabilities, including college-based programs, employment programs. And we received a lot of interest. And we started to receive interest from people who technically were outside of our criteria. So we decided to broaden our criteria so that we could be more inclusive of all the people who wanted to participate. We had representation from different types of fields represented in public service, food service, in office and clerical type work, janitorial, education, and maintenance. Most of our participants worked part-time, which is approximately about 6 to 30 hours per week. And most of our participants lived at home with our family, with their family, while some did live independently as well. And then about a third of participants had attended some form of post-secondary education beyond high school. And we conducted interviews with these 18 participants that was developed based on the interview protocol that was created for the book that I alluded to earlier by David Blustein, The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty, the Eroding Work Experience in America. So we worked with him to develop this protocol. We took his existing protocol and adapted it. We used all of the same questions, but we adapted it to make it a bit more inclusive for our population. We added more supportive questions, follow-up questions to help elude responses. We also added a couple of specific questions about the lived experience of disability and how that impacted their experience in work. And then at the end, we asked for some job advice that the participants would want to give to others with disabilities who were looking for jobs. And I'll share some of those quotes later. And we used a process called consensual qualitative research to analyze the data, which I won't go into the depths of that. But basically, it is a form of content analysis that allowed us to use a mixture of deductive analysis as well as inductive to analyze our codes to see the extent to which participants described experiences that and perspectives that fit within the psychology of working. So you'll see those same three core pillars of psychology of working that David spoke about come up in our study as well. And now James is going to go through each of them briefly and describe a little bit of how we refine those definitions.
Thanks, Carly. So some of our results, we're just going to briefly describe kind of the overall arching themes. But again, the use of that particular qualitative method allowed us, as Carly said, to kind of have this deductive approach and inductive approach. And that was pretty important for us to be able to have that flexibility within our methodology, to be able to really kind of hone in on those specific pillars that David and Carly are talking about, so we could really kind of understand within the theory and the framework how these lived experiences fit. But it also allowed us to kind of expand our understanding, see what the lives of individuals with IDD really were saying, and how does that influence this theory, or how does it influence how we understand employment for that population within this sample. So work as a means of social connection was one of those larger pillars. Again, this idea of social connection as a means of that is so critical for this population who's identified as being very lonely or not as involved in the community. And so we had three larger domains within this broader pillar of interpersonal engagement. So really kind of engaging with the work community and those employees that they might interact with. The importance of having social supports within the workplace. And then finally, kind of expanding professional networks. So what we saw was that really individuals that we interviewed really found some really deep meaning in the connections that they had with their coworkers. And there was multi-layer facets of what those coworkers could provide for them on kind of a social groundwork yeah, sorry, I'm losing my words here. But really the importance of that social connection. And so we had a couple of quotes that we wanted to highlight, really in terms of thinking about that engagement with employees. Work is a major part of your life, and I think it kind of dictates the friendships that you have. And so really the idea is, if I'm not working, I'm not interacting with people. If I'm not working, I'm not building relationships with other people outside of my community. And so therefore, I might be hindering in my opportunities for friendships, right? In terms of those supports in the workplace, I need somebody who tells me how to do anything, give me pointers. The idea that there are natural supports within the workplace and people rely on that, we all rely on that. And so recognizing that, employees can really support people achieve what they want to achieve. The other aspect of this was work as a means for self-determination. And so, the quote being, working for me personally gives me a purpose. And the idea of having agency in our lives is so critical. And self-determination is such an important piece of, work allowing us to build that agency, giving us that autonomy. And so thinking about self-determination in general, there's kind of these larger constructs within that around competence, relatedness, autonomy. And we saw that come up within our individuals that we interviewed. And but what we also kind of came in was this idea of intrinsic motivation, or this authentic motivation. And work really allowed people to become drivers of their own lives by being authentically and intrinsically motivated to work, to contribute to life. And I think that was, even working with this population, one of the surprising factors for me is this idea of just how much work contributes to that motivation, contributes to that autonomy within these people's lives. And so I thought that was really important for me for a self-check. So for instance, a person said, I'm excited on Sunday night. It's like, yay, I'm excited for work. So I get up and I do my normal routine. I get ready for work and then I leave, and my body is excited to get out and work. And so that just really shows the internal drive that somebody's saying, I'm contributing to society. I'm able to do something, achieve something, and I get something from work. And that was just a really powerful thing to see within the transcripts within those interviews. The last main pillar that we'll talk about is work as a means of power and survival. And that power and survival is really critical in the idea of being able, to have purchasing power, to have the power over internal locus of control, having social recognition, so people seeing you as a valuable member of society. And so we really, we saw that also within this particular grouping of people that we interviewed. And this idea of, even having a paycheck to be able to pay for things. We had individuals who were working to be able to afford their transportation, and they were really recognizing the power that they were having over their lives to be able to control what they wanted to control, pay for what they wanted to pay, and then contribute also to their families, their peers, if they're sharing a lived experience. So having that power over independence in daily living, I think it's important because it's a way of earning an income. It helps you. You don't get to do things for free in this life, right? Having social recognition was also very important. So just keep fighting. Don't let the boss say, no, you can't do it. Just tell them you can and let them give you a chance to show that you can. Right? That social recognition, saying, I'm a working person, I could do these things, I can achieve these things, I'm going to show you. And so that was just really another outstanding kind of quote that we got from our sample. And we just really were able to see how these pillars of psychology of working theory really applied for this particular population.
And this is, I'll just share one of the quotes because I know we're running out of time, but this is some of the job advice that our participants shared. That was one of the last questions we asked in the protocol. And I'll just share the one from Jason. He said, life is going to hit you like a boxer. And then every time you get knocked down, you got to make sure that you are the person that gets up. And I think that really exemplifies the persistence and perseverance that many of our participants had to endure being in the job market and enduring in employment. So we'll close with some lessons that we learned from the study and some implications that we think are relevant for your own work. Overall, what we found is that adults with IDD experience deep, impactful meaning from work, just like people without disabilities. And this is especially important when you think about the context, particularly in the United States, which is preceded by decades of exclusion and isolation, where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities historically could not attend school, could not live at home, could not work. And now to see even, we've come very far in our country, but still people with IDD exist on the margins of the human experience overall. And that applies to the workforce, as you can see from the statistics shared earlier. So with that in mind, I know a lot of our audience are professionals in school-based settings or as counselors, and you can be among the first to facilitate these conversations about work and elevate expectations. And what this might look like is identifying your own biases about any assumptions you may have about people with disabilities, and understand that everyone is unique, and that just because somebody has a label of a disability, it doesn't really tell you much about them, and that everybody experiences disability very differently. So as such, it's important to individualize your services and then find collaborators who can support you in that work. So I think now we'll open it up for questions. Thank you so much for your time, and sorry again about the internet issues.